Whoops. You're going to have to move, Nige. Welcome to Gardener's World. Now this is the banana, the Abyssinian banana, Ensete ventricosum morellii. And I got it last summer after I'd seen it growing at Hampton Court Flower Show. And I just loved this plum-coloured, chocolatey stems and foliage and the way that it's so dramatic. Put it into the dual garden. I got a couple and they were fabulous, but they are tender. They won't take any amount of cold. So ever since the beginning of October, this has been stored indoors and then in the greenhouse where it's practically touching the roof. I'm dying to get it out into the garden. So I'm going to keep them out here to harden off, and then they can go out in the garden, and after that they're on their own and I can enjoy them in high summer. Now, as well as enjoying the exotic luxury of bananas, we pay our final visit to South Africa this week, where we go into the forests of the Drakensberg Mountains to find growing one of the UK's favourite houseplants.
What we have here is Streptocarpus johannes, one of the most exciting Streptocarpus species. It's got an open face which looks at you.
And Joe has been discovering some hanging baskets with a difference.
Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And is there a kokedama for every situation?
Absolutely. Christmas time, you can make kokedama out of hellebores. I've even known people that have actually kokedamaed an almond tree.
Well, just as I put the bananas outside, it started to rain heavily. That won't hurt the bananas at all. They don't mind wet. In fact, they need lots of moisture. It's just cold you have to worry about, and too much wind, because that will rip the leaves. So if it gets really windy and stormy, I'll have to bring them back in. But before I do, it's a chance, now they're out the way, to have a look at the vine that I planted a couple of years ago. This is a black Hamburg grape. It's a dessert grape. And the first year, it grew just up to here. Last year, we had 4 bunches of grapes. You can see the black, which is last year's growth, reached down to about there. This year, I'm training 2 long arms, if you like, from which grow rods or cordons, and they carry the fruit. So I've put up 1, 2, 3 more wires, and eventually it will go right up on both sides, and then the fruit will hang down. Now, the crucial thing when you're growing a vine is not to overstress it too quickly. You're looking for 1 bunch per foot, and for this year, which is its 3rd year, just 1 bunch per rod, and that will do. So if I go along here, I've got a bunch there. I'm going to take this bunch off. It's cruel, but that goes. And then here, I've got a bunch. We'll take that one off too. Of course, you don't need a greenhouse to grow grapes. You can grow them outside, you can grow them in a pot, you can train them against a wall. They're very, very tough, adaptable plants. Now, it really pains me to take these potential grapes away, because they are delicious. But it's really important in the early years of a vine, and by that I mean the first up to 6 years, you go for quality, not quantity. Now, these are Streptocarpus, one of our most popular houseplants, and really easy to grow if you give them the right conditions. I bought these at Malvern last year, and they flowered continuously from last May until the end of March. So now they're going to a dormant period, but they will need repotting from time to time. You can see that's a mat of root, but when you're potting on anything, don't be tempted to put it into too big a pot, thinking, oh, great, it'll become a great big plant. It doesn't work like that. The old rule used to be go the next size up. Well, you may not have the next size up, but just a little bit more. An inch all round is plenty. So if I take this size pot, that'll be plenty big enough for it. What I'm using is simply leaf mould. You can buy proprietary compost, but the important thing is it mustn't be too rich in nutrients. So that will sit like that, and then put this around it. And these literally are rotted leaves and nothing else at all. And the perfect place for them is a north-facing windowsill. They really don't like direct sunlight. That scorches them and does them no good at all. Don't soak them too much. Let them dry out completely in between watering, and then make sure you don't get the leaves too wet. Having potted these on, I won't need to feed them. In fact, you should only feed them when you've potted them on when you see the roots coming out the bottom of the pot, and that won't be for another month or so. And in fact, I feed these monthly, no more than that. Give them a dilute high potash feed. And you can have high potash liquid seaweed, a tomato feed, homemade comfrey feed. These will all do the job. And these are a plant that, if you give them what they want, they'll be completely happy. But to find out what any plant wants, the best thing you can possibly do is see it growing in its native environment. And we went to the Drakensberg Mountains in South Africa to do precisely that.
South Africa is famous for the sun-loving flora that inhabits its coastline and exposed mountain slopes. But there is another very different habitat that's home to a very familiar species, Streptocarpus. And subtropical woodland is their ideal habitat. The trees in this ravine provide shade and shelter for the plants and animals that inhabit it, and keep the forest floor moist and humid. In winter, temperatures here never fall below freezing, and the rainfall is at best infrequent. So these plants never experience the cold and wet that we're familiar with in Britain. Martin Kunthart has been studying South African Streptocarpus for decades.
What we have here is Streptocarpus rexi, which was the first strep to be introduced to the United Kingdom back in the 1800s. This Streptocarpus is found further south than any of the other species, and they have a very wide temperature and climatic tolerance. That's why it's been used so widely in hybridization. These plants don't like being overwatered. In fact, if they're underwater, they actually do better for you. These Strep rexii are basically lithophytic at the moment because they're growing on rocks. They're not sitting in water all the time. The water's always flowing. What you can see these plants growing on here is sphagnum moss, and it just shows you that the plants do not require soil to grow in. The plants will have lots of air spaces, there's lots of oxygen, and that's exactly what Strep's like. One of the characteristics you will notice among Streptocarpus, especially as the weather starts getting cooler, is an abscission line, which is a yellowish line that will move up the leaf, with the paler section of the leaf being below the abscission line. The plant isn't diseased, and the reason for the abscission line is because the soil temperature is too cool, and the plant cannot absorb nutrients through its roots, so it'll reabsorb the nutrients up its leaves. But when it does start to warm up, the soil temperature will be warm enough for the roots to start absorbing nutrients. That's the time that you can start feeding your plant.
Streptocarpus are found all over this forest. Some take root on rocks, whilst others are epiphytic, which means that they grow on trees. The constantly humid environment of these subtropical forests provides perfect growing conditions for these plants, which rely solely upon the moisture and nutrients from the warm, damp air. But the forest floor is also rich in plant life.
What we have here is Streptocarpus johannes, one of the most exciting Streptocarpus species. It's got an open face which looks at you, and it's a magnificent little rosette of leaves. It's only a terrestrial plant. In other words, it doesn't grow in the trees, it doesn't grow on the rocks. All the decomposed leaf mold and bits of bark and things like that, and that's exactly what the Streps are growing in. That's their ideal medium. This one for the hybridizer is very exciting because Streptocarpus johannes produces numerous flower stems per plant. It's really an amazing plant to use in hybridization.
Streptocarpus flower for months in these forests, and of course it's this protracted flowering that has made generations of gardeners covet them. When the flowers are fertilised and then fade, a long, twisted fruit capsule forms.
When the Streptocarpus seed pod dries, it dries and it opens, and masses and masses of small little seeds, tiny little seeds, will float away in the wind and be deposited on layers like moss, and there they'll germinate. Streptocarpus species are usually very isolated colonies, and those isolated colonies, because they're so separate, they've never developed something to impede the hybridization of them. And that's what's so exciting for us breeders, because you can take different species and start hybridizing. When we start introducing colors into those hybrids, that's when you open Pandora's box, and Pandora's box is exciting.
For centuries, Streptocarpus have excited and entranced gardeners around the world. But sometimes they can prove a little tricky. However, recreating the complex conditions in which these beautiful plants will flourish is both fascinating and richly rewarding.
Come on. I remember when we were filming Round the World in 80 Gardens, going to the Drakensberg Mountains, and it was a very hot day, but there was a terrific thunderstorm. So we ran into this gully for shelter with trees over it, and whilst the rain was pounding down, we noticed that the bank that we were sheltering against was covered in Streptocarpus. So exactly that environment, moist, warm, shaded. And there is no doubt that if you see any plant growing in the wild, you know instantly how you should grow it in your garden. Well, it's not warm and wet here, it's cold and wet, but thank heavens for a potting shed, because that means I can get on with sowing some seed. And now is the perfect time to sow biennials. Now, biennials are short-lived plants that span their lives across 2 growing seasons. So the seeds are set and fall from late spring to midsummer. And wallflowers are a good example. Setting their seed now, they fall to the ground, they germinate and grow a young plant. But they don't flower in the same year. They overwinter, and then they flower the following spring, and they set seed, and so it goes. Now, I mentioned wallflowers, and I want to sow some, and I always like to grow lots because it's a very cheap way of making a dramatic statement. If you want to have a blaze of colour, you need to buy at least dozens, if not hundreds of plants. It will run into a fair amount of money, whereas a couple of packets of seed, and there's your hundreds of plants. So, take a seed tray or pot like this, a seed mix, and you can buy special seed mixes, or you can use a general purpose compost, or you can make your own as I do. But the difference between a seed and a potting mix is essentially it's lower in nutrients. And it's got a nice open root run for little seedlings to work out into. And if I take a packet of seeds, this is blood red. So there you have the seed, and each one of these is potentially going to make a nice, strong, beautiful, sweet-smelling plant. Just sprinkle it relatively thinly, because each of these are going to make a seedling that's got to be pricked out. Now just cover that lightly with a layer of soil, and it can be very light. That'll do. OK, that's just wallflowers, but there are plenty of others. Foxgloves are one of my favourite biennials, and I've collected seed from the white foxglove, Alba, and the wild foxglove. And you can see I just collected up the seed heads and put them into an envelope, and there are thousands of seeds there. And it is amazing to think that each of those tiny seeds is going to make a spire of flower, perhaps 3-4 foot tall. The other day I saw foxgloves for sale individually for £3-4 pounds each. So it can save you so much money growing from seed. So the regime is to water these, leave them to germinate, which they'll do in a week or 2. When they're big enough, prick them out into plugs, let them grow on, and that can happen outside, doesn't need any protection for that. And then when they're robust little plants, either plant them where you want them to grow, or put them somewhere where they can be lined out in the soil, grow on, and then go into their final position in autumn to flower next year. These are easy, tough plants to grow. And by planning ahead, you're guaranteeing a really dramatic display next spring at a fraction of the cost of buying plants. Now, that's sowing biennials. But here are some other jobs you can be doing this weekend. If, like me, you've sown climbing beans, but grown them under protection because it's been a little cold to plant out, you can safely put them into the ground now, placing one plant against each support. If you haven't sown any yet, there's still plenty of time to sow the seeds direct into the ground where they will germinate quickly. Late flowering clematis are growing practically in front of your eyes at the moment. And it's important to keep this growth tied into the support. Otherwise, it can form an unruly tangle, which can then hide the flowers when they appear in about a month's time. At this time of year, fresh new growth will make excellent cutting material, putting on new roots very quickly. Place your cuttings immediately into a polythene bag, and then pot them into a free-draining compost, stripping off any excess foliage. Either place a bag over the top to trap evaporation, or else mist them at least twice a day to keep them moist. You'll know they've produced roots when you see signs of fresh growth. Those rosemary should root very quickly and be ready to prick out in a matter of weeks and plant into the garden round about the end of summer. Now, last week, Joe started a quest to see if he could learn to love hanging baskets. And this week, he finds that perhaps the Japanese have the answer.
They're bold, they're bright, and they bombard us with colour. And I know that millions of people love them, but I'm not one of them. Am I missing something when it comes to hanging baskets? Granted, they bring a welcome flash of optimism to our home fronts and high streets, but I'm far from being convinced I'm ready for one in my own garden. So in a bid to like, or who knows, even love these creations, I'm digging deeper. Actually, this one's quite nice, simple and white. Maybe I'm turning. For me, hanging baskets usually bring to mind clashing bundles of pansies, geraniums and petunias, but I'm told there's more to them. Florist Thomas Broom has been perfecting a more radical approach in his garden shed. So what have we got here then?
So these are kokedama, or otherwise known as Japanese string gardens.
I really like the way you've laid these out. I mean, these are very sweet.
Yeah, no, they are very sweet.
A lovely composition, different heights and lots of different plants. So we've got, what have we got, mint here?
So this is calamint, so that's a sort of wild flower, but again, when it flowers, beautiful little blue starry-like flowers.
And what have we got here on the corner?
So this is Diassia, a great container plant, but it looks fantastic in a kokedama, something quite different.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And is there a kokedama for every situation?
Absolutely. Christmas time, you can make kokedama out of hellebores. I've even known people that have actually kokedama'd an almond tree.
What about maintenance? Are they a lot of work?
There is quite a lot of maintenance involved, depending on what you plant in them. Things like these annuals will require daily watering in the height of summer, and, you know, I do that by dunking them in a bucket and then leave it to drip overnight.
So what got you into them in the first place?
I used to work for a Japanese airline, and one time I had some time down route on my own, and I found a florist who actually had kokedama hanging outside. So I was quite intrigued, because to me they looked unique and very different. And since then, it's sort of been something that I've always done.
And is it really catching on over here?
It is. As sort of a younger generation of people are becoming interested in gardening, and particularly people who have smaller gardens, it's become quite modern and funky to have, particularly in a sort of contemporary setting.
So much so that Thomas now holds regular Kokedama workshops at a London nursery.
I want to make loads. We're just doing the garden, so I want to hang them all around the garden.
They're very freeing and very creative. They're just so strange and, you know, they're mystic. They're quite majestic looking as well.
Perfect.
Yeah. So chuffed with that.
If hip young Londoners are getting involved, being one myself, I should really give it a try.
So there's 2 types of compost that you need. You use 2 parts bonsai compost to 1 part multi-purpose compost.
OK. What's in bonsai compost?
So it's quite a lot of sand, so it's very good sort of free draining compost. But actually the mixture of it with the multi-purpose compost and water, it forms a sort of clay. Don't know if you want to get your hands dirty,
yeah,
all right?
cool. Listen, I'm a gardener. I'm going to get my hands dirty. I thought you'd never ask. Come on, then.
So just stir it around.
Yeah.
A bit like you're making a Christmas pudding mixture.
Yes, lovely.
Now you need to really compress this, and you'll see all the water dripping out.
OK, fine. You got
Next
the ball?
thing
Yes.
is to add the plant.
OK, well, I am going to go for the
The
asparagus fern. A little textural number.
You're not going to harm the plant, but take off as much of the compost around the plant as possible.
How are you going to get that into that? I mean, they're about the same size.
This is the magic. So, take your sphere.
Yeah.
You basically have to twist the ball and separate, so you should have 2 halves of a sphere. There we go.
Not bad, eh?
So, just place it here, and then the other one on top,
yeah.
and push together.
Oh.
So the next part is to put moss.
Yes, let's
around
get the moss
ball.
on and hold the whole thing together.
You can't forage for moss in forests or anything like that because it's, you know, against the law. So you can get this from garden centres or from florists, but not from anywhere in public spaces. So if you put some at the bottom...
Oh, very delicate. OK. Right.
And some around the edge. It's a bit like wrapping an apple in pastry.
So far, so good, yeah?
Yeah.
Is it a good shape?
Yeah, good shape. You've got that sort of spherical shape.
OK.
So the next part is the string. Doesn't matter what direction you go in. It doesn't have to be in any sort of pattern.
But just keep it all in. Oh, yeah, it feels more and more solid.
Yeah.
Look at that.
See, it's looking great.
And do I just chop that and tie it together?
Chop that.
OK. I'm going to use a little Swifty reef knot, we call it.
OK.
Hey? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic.
I'm quite pleased with that.
Yeah, no, you should be.
I have
It
to
looks
say.
fantastic.
I think that was incredibly satisfying and rewarding. Well, I'm not sure if these are the future of hanging baskets, but I've really enjoyed making my first Kokedama. And I like them a lot. I like the way they're really natural, just the moss, the plant, and some jute string around them. These Kokedama couldn't feel more different from the baskets I looked at a couple of weeks ago. But now I know that anything's possible, I'm going to create my own take on a hanging basket next time.
Well, I confess that I'd never heard of Kokedama before. And they do look interesting, if a little bit like a sprouting coconut. And I'll tell you what, how lovely to see Joe Swift getting his hands dirty. Now, I'm going to get my hands dirty and plant something that is about as far removed from Kokedama or a hanging basket as could possibly be. Last year, I cut down a quince tree that was blighted. And it's created an open space, which I wanted, light and air coming in. But it's a problem site because all the planting around the pond is lush and likes fairly wet, rich soil. But here, raised up above the pond, it's actually bone dry in summer. So I've got a plant here that is going to fill the gap, but not overwhelming it. It's a cranberry, Cranberry cordifolia. Cranberry maritima, its cousin, is sea kale that we eat. Cordifolia is not edible, slightly larger version. The foliage of cranberry actually doesn't give you any idea of what the flowers are going to be like because these great big cabbage leaves, and remember it is a kale, spawn a lovely froth of delicate white flowers in the end of May, in June, that shimmer and float above the ground and can get up to about 6 feet tall. So it gives good architectural qualities, and then you cut it back in mid or late autumn, it disappears, and then will reappear again in spring. So a really statuesque plant that is adapted beautifully to growing almost anywhere. It will grow in practically any soil. It'll grow in full sun, in part shade. The one thing it's got to have is good drainage. So I've loosened the soil at the bottom of the hole. Now, if you look at the plant I've got, that's a hand span in depth, and I've dug a hole that is much too big. And it's really important when you plant it that the crown, the point at which where the leaves sprout from, is above ground level. I don't want to plant it like that, but about like that. So I'll put the whole of this grit into the hole. And sit the roots directly on top of the grit. So it's sitting slightly proud of the surrounding soil, and that any water will drain away fairly quickly. Cranberry has slightly fallen out of favour in the sense that not so many people grow it. And I think more people should grow it. It's a fabulous plant. There we go. Over to you now. Do your stuff. Sometimes, and at some moments in the year, plant combinations just work. And today it's here. This is the Viburnum plicatum Marisii with these lovely tiered white flowers. And I love the way it hangs over this hosta. This is Albo marginata. The variegation around the outside picks up the white of the viburnum, and also the way that the leaves shape are actually reflected by the hosta. We think of hostas as great big sort of plants and dramatic. Sometimes they can be really subtle. And the green of the Osmunda fern in the background, shining out of the dark. Exactly at this time of year, you get that sort of intensity. Now, that's deliberate, but sometimes things can be just as good when they're an accident as well. This viburnum I cut to the ground 3 years ago, wanting to get rid of it. Couldn't be bothered to dig the roots out there and then. In spring it started to grow back, and look, it's grown back hugely and makes a really good composition, and there, popping through its branches, a self-sown angelica. Sometimes you just have to say nature does it better than you possibly could. Well, that's it for today. I'll be back here at Longmeadow next week at the same time. So join me then. Bye-bye. Come on.